I think that OPEC certainly isn't as relevant as it used to be. Back in the 70s, it was 70% of oil production. Today, it's less than 30. And in terms of traded oil, which determines the market price, it's much, much lower than that. We've seen in the past that OPEC can still cooperate when there are political differences. In the 80s, I mean, Iraq and Iran fought a war and could still cooperate in OPEC. So I don't think that's the issue. The key question is, do they really still impact the price? Or should we be looking at how is U.S. production going to react to this sudden low oil price? It's definitely going to reduce, but how far and how fast? And on the supply side, and then on the demand side, countries like China and countries like India, that's actually now has faster growing petrol demand than China does. And how much are they going to respond to the low oil prices with the demand pickup? The risk I see is there's a huge fall in investment in oil and gas. 20% last year, another 15 to 20% this year. The first time ever we've seen 2 years in a row of falling investment. So when the prices do come back, and it could take a year or more, it could be a sharp shock in the other direction.
Let's talk about Iraq, because you obviously are very involved in that country. Talk to me a little bit about what we've seen from the leadership, because I spoke earlier with the Prime Minister of Iraq, and he said, I'm basically fighting a war on three fronts, not just corruption, not just low oil prices, but also, of course, the war against the Islamic State. How is this low price environment really impacting that fight?
Yeah, I mean, Iraq, the issue, of course, despite having huge oil and gas reserves, I mean, second after Saudi, but potentially even more, I believe, more. The issue is that the service contracts that they signed means they have to pay the oil and gas companies. They have to refund any expenditures, and they just can't afford that with the war on ISIS and oil down 75%. So they've been publicly asking oil and gas companies not to invest. So even though they managed to take production up rapidly to 4 million barrels a day, it's going to be difficult to sustain that without investment. So they're also having to take a long, hard look at policies. And the public sector payroll has fallen to 6.7 million.
They've got to pay salaries and pay their soldiers, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, that's a key issue in the Kurdistan region. You know, there are arrears in payments for the soldiers, and both the federal government and the regional government are asking for international support.
What about in the UAE? Because we've seen a lot of things happening in that country over the last year in terms of they now have a much more overt foreign policy, as to Saudi Arabia, for example. What do you think is the outlook there in terms of the business and investment side of things? Because obviously those regional markets are going to feel the impact of this low price environment for a while. Sure.
I think stock markets certainly have reacted, but as they have globally. I think there's been a bit of a slowdown, of course, in the real estate sector, a softening, if you like. That might not be a bad thing in the longer term, because there were fears last year of another bubble. But I think the key is the stability is there, which is the most important thing for business, and the infrastructure is second to none in the region. And that's why I think in terms of long-term competitiveness, the outlook is quite positive for the UAE, and certainly in terms of economic diversification. It's the second largest economy in the Arab world, and by far the most diversified of the major oil producers.
So even if I'm hearing a lot of doom and gloom in terms of investors looking to lay out the cash, you think that the long-term scenario is looking good?
I think stock markets around the world have clearly had a rocky start to the year, but the underlying economic fundamentals are still not bad. And here in Davos, there's still healthy skepticism for whether we really are about to see another major recession. I'm still cautiously optimistic.